Why we made an office? I think we wanted to make architecture very soon, and while working in other offices, somehow we met, and even already in school, and I think there was already a big understanding between us, and just these two things together make an office, and there was no big master plan apart from that feeling.
I think we started the office roughly 2002, 2003, and many things you perhaps do unconsciously, but of course there's always a context, and I think we were very much also confronted with what was happening in architecture back then. I think it was the tale of the Dutch spectacle in a way, and I mean still in Spain things were going on high intensity. I think we were very much influenced. I mean, both David and myself, we studied in Spain under Abuelos and Herreros. I worked in Holland for quite some years. David worked with people who had worked in Holland. So this context was close to us, but at the same time, I think we felt that we were not entirely satisfied with what was going on. So to make architecture, as David just said, I guess we had to start from scratch again. I mean, and maybe reconnect to older ideas. First of all, I think the title of the exhibition is Everything Architecture and not Everything is Architecture. And that subtle difference, I think, is very important. That does not mean that, of course, we open up a little bit what could be architecture, but at the same time, we keep for ourselves, I would say, the power to decide what's in and what's out.
We think it's kind of a very honest exhibition because first of all, as you understand, we have an office for like nearly 15 years, which is sometimes frightening to realize. But also it's a big amount of things already, and we realized that we could fill quite a bit of space with what have been our production, what is still our production, and it's in that sense very direct. And so we made a lot of exhibitions before, rather focusing on what is an architecture exhibition, what is one-to-one intervention, how can you make space as an exhibition. This time we made with the numerous projects the space. It's something that has an immediate effect on itself, just because of we expose, let's say, very honestly, what is our world of architecture, and that's also maybe what the title refers to, the way we make architecture. That's how we, and it's also, we don't show a lot of realizations, we show rather how we think and produce products of architecture, which are plans, which are collages, which are models. All these things are our world of thinking.
You could give a very pragmatic answer to that question. You could say we were not particularly gifted in complex geometries and stuff like that, so it was not even ever on the table. There is always been that intentionality, that when you do something, you have to be somewhat in control. And in order to be in control, it has to be controllable. And in order to be controllable, it might not have to be that complex. You do not necessarily have to reinvent every single plan, because the idea that architecture, maybe that was a modernist idea, starts from scratch or has to answer a certain idea of flows, which was very much in the 90s, in the early 2000s. No, I think we are both fascinated in this kind of a culture of architecture which has always been there and which you try to rediscover. So you do not necessarily have to make things extremely difficult.
There's a certain element of pragmatism, but also how we feel life. We talk a lot with these two words, frame and content, and frame rather being, let's say, what we deal with, architecture, and content is probably then what we cannot deal with, rather life. And by making a kind of harsh distinguish between what you can and cannot control, you somehow can make one the very abstract and the other unfold in all its richness. And I think that's very important in our work, in the sense that you say, okay, there's a certain level of abstraction, but at the same time, this is not eliminating any complexity.
If you see it in the very broad picture, you could argue the world as we are living in it today is completely inhabited, is completely discovered, is completely covered also. Say concepts as, say, non-stop city or this kind of utopias of the 60s and 70s, as a claim you could say, they're fully realized. I mean, non-stop cities everywhere. It just happens not to look exactly like the collages of the time. The ubiquity of the urban deals with a lack of, I would say, hierarchy. So everything is everywhere and nothing is really special anymore. There's no inside and outside. I mean, if one thinks of the time of the Enlightenment where all of a sudden you could put say a hospital or even a cemetery outside of the city because you didn't want to see it. But I mean, where would be that outside? So you're dealing with this. You need to bring in a certain space. I mean, space for yourself, maybe conditioned space, inside space, but also sometimes space to negotiate with what's next to you. And I guess one of the reasons, but maybe not the only one, why for us these outside spaces, wherever you work, are important is this, that you kind of are able to not just negotiate the minimum of what you need, but you also negotiate the distance between you and the next person.
We're fascinated by two very opposite things, you could say. One is wilderness and the other one is this even covered field. But if you think about it further, maybe they are the same. In the sense that the even covered field could be the new wilderness. After we made the project for the border crossing between Mexico and the United States, which is a wall with a garden inside, we discovered this etching of Anastasius Kircher, which is exactly, it depicts Eden. It's exactly a wall around the garden and the rest is wilderness. You need that wall to make the Eden. Way of framing, again, urbanity in a very rigid way, but then again, being able to see that becoming a background for development of city as such. And so there's always this duality of both, and that's maybe what you designs more what you cannot design, and this is very important. And the project of the Korean capital or administrative capital was mainly about what you cannot design also.
Absolutely. I think that's maybe sometimes even quite misunderstood. The Korean project we did with Dogma, I guess ultimately it is more about what architecture form cannot do than what it can do. Or at least it is about the slippage between the two of them. Oddly enough, the moment you accept that these things do not exactly coincide, I mean form and say content, or form and the organization of whatever activity, it gives you the freedom to design the form of its architecture. So this sequence, this enfilade of rooms which are ultimately made by hypothetical buildings of 10 floors high was in a way a kind of a densification of many echoes about the city of 10 floors, about the city of squares, about the fact that you can only build or control maybe only up to 30% of the city, that if you think of the story of Brasilia, that you can idealize building a city, but then the moment you build a city, where do the builders live? I mean, that story you all know. So in the Korean project, many of these things come together. At the same time, it was also, of course, I mean, one thinks of the cross towers of Corbusier's Ville Radieuse, but if you see them in the Korean context, they become in a way a reflection upon these typical slab-like kind of urban developments. The Korean project as a master plan, it was, as the grid does by the way, it put emphasis on that what the grid does not design. And I guess for us as an office, it was a very important, I would say, expression of a train of thoughts which has been coming back before, but also came back many times afterwards in many different scales. I would say it is this almost fatalist desire to design everything, and the complete, I mean, the far from naive acknowledgement that trying to design everything is bound to fail.
Mm.